Hello, everyone. So our group is going to be focusing on narrative research, and I will be introducing it and elaborating more on the definitions and histories and the different types. So to first start off, the term narrative research comes from various definitions, but most broadly, it refers to research methodology that uses stories and storytelling as a source of knowledge. Narrative research has many forms and uses a variety of analytic practices and is rooted in different social and humanities disciplines. Narrative might refer to the phenomenon being studied, for instance, narrative of illness, or the method that is being used in a study, for instance, procedures of analyzing stories being told. As a method, it begins really with the experiences expressed in lived and told stories of individuals. Czerniawska defines narrative research as a type of qualitative design in which narrative is understood as a spoken or written text giving an account of an event, action, or series of events, actions chronologically connected. In terms of procedures, it consists of focusing on studying one or two individuals, gathering data through the collection of their stories, and reporting individual experiences and chronologically ordering the meaning of those experiences. In terms of features, narrative researchers collect stories from individuals about individuals' lived and told experiences. And so the stories can be told to the researcher or co-constructed between researcher and participant, or a story can be intended as a performance to convey some message or point. So there may be a really strong collaborative feature of narrative research as the story emerges through the interaction or dialogue of the researcher and the participant. Narrative stories tell of individual experiences, and they may shed light on the identities of individuals and how they see themselves. In addition, narrative stories often contain turning points or specific tensions or interruptions that are highlighted by the researchers in the telling of the stories. Another feature is narrative stories occur within specific places or situations. The context then becomes important for the researcher's telling of the story within a place. In terms of data collection, narrative stories are gathered through many different forms of data, such as through interviews, but can also be done through observations, documents, pictures, and other sources of qualitative data. Narrative stories often are heard and shaped by the researchers into a chronology, although they may not be told that way by the participants themselves. So there is a temporal change that is conveyed when individuals talk about their experiences and their lives, which may be in the past or the present or the future. In terms of data analysis, narrative stories are analyzed in various ways. So 3 of them I will describe a little bit more further, but essentially they are thematically, structurally, and in dialogic performance way. In terms of history, narrative research has really interdisciplinary roots and from different fields. And although it originated from literature, history, anthropology, sociology, sociolinguistic, and education, different fields of study have adopted their own approaches. And in the last 2 decades, narrative has acquired an increasingly high profile in social research. Some of the academic antecedents of contemporary narrative research are one being the post-war rise of humanist approaches within Western sociology and psychology, which provided more person-centered approaches, often including attention to individual case studies, biographies, and life histories. It also emerged from the narrative turn in psychology and in the works of Jerome Bruner more than 20 years ago, as well as Nelson's classic case study of a 2-year-old. There's also, antecedents and influence from social constructivism, belief that individuals learn and develop through participation in social activities in the world. As well as Russian structuralism being a mode of knowledge of nature and human life that is interested in relationships rather than individual objects. There's also the influence of French post-structuralism, which instead of structuralism there was a resurgence of interest in feminism, Western Marxism, feminology, and nihilism. There was also the influence of postmodern psychoanalytic deconstructionism, which refers to the deconstruction refers to the approaches to understanding the relationship between text and meaning. So for types of narratives, there's really two main lines. First one is considering the data analysis strategy used by the narrative researcher. So using different types of analytical strategies, the researcher extracts themes that hold across stories or types of stories. So this is more of a storytelling mode in which the narrative researcher shapes the stories based on a plot line or literary approach. The second one being considering the analytical strategies based on passing constraints on narratives. So these are narratives that are composed interactively between researchers and participants, as well as the interpretations developed by various narrators. And so the three types of approaches used to analyze narrative stories were that I started explaining was thematic analysis. That one is where the researcher identifies the themes told by a participant. The second one being structural analysis, where the meaning shifts to the telling, and the story can be cast during a conversation in comedic terms or tragedy, satire, romance, or other forms. And the third one being dialogic performance analysis, where the focus turns to how the story is being produced or performed. So produced, an example of that is like interactively between the researcher and the participant, and performed being meant to convey some message or point. So the different types of narratives one can find is a biographical study, a form of which is a form of narrative study in which the researcher writes and records the experiences of another person's life. The second one being an autoethnography, which is written and recorded by the individuals who are the subject of the study. So it's really an amalgamation of multiple personalities, consciousnesses. One is narrating, another is observing, and witnessing, another is critiquing. So they really contain the personal story of the author as well as the larger cultural meaning of the individual stories. And then there's a life history, which portrays an individual's entire life. And then finally, an oral history, which is a gathering of personal reflections of events and their causes and effects from one individual or several individuals. And they can have specific contextual focuses or use specific interpretive frameworks, like, for instance, a framework that reports stories of women using feminist interpretations. All right, so that's my part.
All right, so now we'll be going over the methodology, processes, and procedures. Excuse me. Okay, so first, you would analyze whether the research problem or question aligns with the narrative goal. You would then select an individual with an expansive story to share. And I said individual, it could be one or two people, but for narrative, it's best when it focuses on one person. You can record what these stories are via journaling, field notes, obtaining memos from the individual, letters, photographs, and other family artifacts. Next, you would review ways of conveying the information through time play within conversations shared. So when I say time play, I mean the individual might share a piece of information with you in the story out of chronological order. So when you're choosing to highlight a specific part of the story, you could shift one event to the beginning and use that as like a framework to show a common theme, and then share when it actually happened in the individual's life. Next part of that is reframing meanings to better understand the common theme. So what that means is not changing what the individual is trying to convey, but specifically trying to explain the information in a way that's best understood by the audience. Next, you would present accurate social, cultural, and historical context. You would then examine the stories to actively restory, which is the process of reorganizing the stories into some general type of framework. So I included this hero's journey image at the bottom to show how you could take one part of the story and connect it to a beginning part of the story, which essentially just shows metaphorical meanings, symbolic meanings, and overarching meanings that you've agreed upon with the individual. and by or reorganizing different pieces of the story. You would then, as the researcher, practice collaboration, learning, and exchanging with the individual/participant. So this could look like negotiations over the story context, researcher then presenting insights of subsequent self-exploration as well, which means that the researcher shares what they have learned or gained as knowledge from the sharing of the story by the participant. So this is a piece of artwork by Sally Ding. It was included in a New York Times article. She is a Chinese immigrant. I placed this piece of art to lead up into the narrative case example. So the narrative example, complexity, harmony, and tension. So the case study was a Chinese immigrant student in a Canadian middle school. Overall, the student, teacher, and parents' stories were interwoven within each other, but the researcher examined intersections of influence within the immigrant's life. So this would be assimilation, growing diversity of North America, language barriers, and further values of identity, or just how the identity was seen by how the self-identity of the Chinese immigrant was seen by either the peers or just within itself. Next, the researcher followed one theoretical framework, which in this case was Dewey's philosophy of interconnectedness. Then the method of observations included classroom witnessing, which is essentially the researcher sitting in a classroom for some subject for the participant, collection of student council meetings that the participant was involved in, peer perspective, so friends of the participant, assisting with homework, which was unique. So basically the researcher got involved with tutoring to show a commitment to the development of the student and just to show support while also gathering information for the narrative study. And then of course, interviews of the parents, teacher, and then of course the parents and teacher together to see where there could be some overlap in values and where some differences as well. The length of the study was 2 years, and the outcome was that language barrier awareness increased. So the different ways that the student was misinterpreting homework, different direction or guidance that the teacher was providing. It was the integration of identity that was supported. So how can an immigrant student, without being forced to assimilate, also adopt the culture of the Canadian middle school, while also the Canadian middle school seeing and witnessing and accepting the culture of the Chinese immigrant student. Awareness of teacher versus parent expectations. So there were some variances and difference between the teacher and parents and what they wanted out of the student. And so this was a way for them to overlap some values. Okay, so getting into purpose statement and research questions. So the purpose statement identifies the approach, indicates action, identifies central phenomenon, foreshadows participant, and the site that the participant is involved with. So example is, the author describes and analyzes the process of eliciting the life history of a man with mental retardation. So this was an example from Cresswell, the book. Next, the research question focuses on one central question and is open-ended, evolving, and non-directional. So an example, of this is, what are the conflicting stories of ethnic identity that Aimee experienced in her school, with her peers, and with her family? This was an example taken from the case study with the Chinese immigrant student in the Canadian middle school. Okay, so sampling, strategy, and forms of data. So the participants are ideally one individual for a narrative study. It should also focus in the participant selection process on convenience, importance, any marginalization that could be happening, and normativity. So what I'm saying is essentially, does the individual fit the goal of the study? And are the researchers considering the systemic framework or even systemic oppression that the individual may be going through to accurately select someone who could represent and accurately represent the goal of the research study? And then normativity just shows, are they looking for someone with what would be considered normal experience for the region and site at which the study would occur? Or are they looking for someone with a completely different or unique experience that would vary greatly from others who could be selected for the study? So sampling type, maximum variation sampling is often used in studies in general, which is just looking at differences amongst a group and choosing participants with significant differences. However, for narrative, the alignment of goals within a study is more important. For sampling size, for narrative is 1 or 2 individuals with a larger pool of observers or peers, colleagues, different ways of stating that. And then data forms could be observations, interviews, documents, audio visuals, so just videography, anything that would correlate with the meaning of the narrative study. So getting into data analysis, so there's this quote from Creswell that says, I think that Reisman says it best when she comments that narrative analysis refers to a family of methods for interpreting texts that have in common a storied form. So what this is getting into is there is a story to tell. There's chronology, so the order at which events took place that either cannot be rearranged or one part can be highlighted more than others. There's turning points and epiphanies that come through the study. And the study can take, or the narrative analysis approach really can take a literary orientation such as examining for 5 major plot points or examining interactions, continuity in the story, and situational awareness and just situations in general. For the analysis further, it would be data organization, reading and memoing, describing the data into codes and themes, classifying the data into codes and themes. All right, and the next part will be the challenges. Thank you for listening.
Share. Okay, so for the challenges in narrative research, so for a narrative approach, the researcher needs to collect extensive information and have a very clear understanding of a person's life. People and experiences are always very multi-layered and complex, and so it takes a keen eye to identify the source material to fully capture an individual's experience. It's also really important to reflect on how, as a researcher, we're resharing a person's story. This also includes awareness of political background or any political stance that you might be taking as a researcher, biases and assumptions. So kind of connecting back to an epoche and just having that awareness about your stance in regards to the topic and the area that is being researched. And then addressing power relations, who owns this story, who can tell it, who can change it. So really honoring someone's story and their voice and making sure that their voice is maintained in the restorying of someone's story. Research problem. The intent of qualitative research is to provide a rationale or need for studying a particular issue or problem. So qualitative studies not only add to literature, but they can also give voice to underrepresented groups and able to share their stories. Access and rapport. Gaining access to sites and individuals involves several steps. Regardless of the approach to inquiry, permission needs to be sought from a human subjects review board, especially in the US. So this is very much so, I kind of see this as like a whole means for consent. And so specifically in narrative study, researchers and inquirers gain information from individuals by obtaining their permission to participate in their study. Study participants should be apprised of the motivation of the researcher for their selection, granted anonymity if they want, and told by the researcher the purpose of the study. So in order for the participant to be able to consent, it's crucial that they know all of this information about the why, the who, what, when, all of the things around why this research is being done and why they're being asked to be a participant in this. And this also includes access to biographical documents and archives. That also requires permission. So in writing a narrative study, authors, so this is kind of talking about the structure of it all. Authors are often unwilling to prescribe a tightly structured writing strategy. I really appreciate this actually, because I feel like it says authors suggest a lot of flexibility and emphasizing core elements. As narrative inquirers, we need to hold open and to make visible the ways participants and we struggle for coherence. So it's a co-composing, a really strong co-composing element in a narrative study, which kind of relates directly back to what I was saying about just the importance of consent and being able to re-story someone's story, and just this element of co-composing. And they're encouraged to experiment with form. So in the book, it was saying like researchers and inquirers could draw like inspiration from different novels or even poems or authors that they like. And so I think that the flexibility in the structure can really support telling and sharing someone's unique story and experience in a way that is like adaptable to their truth and their experience. And then the three-dimensional narrative inquiry space, it involves both the personal and social aspects of the experience. And in using this framework, the researcher analyzes the story for both the personal experiences of the storyteller and his or her interactions with other people. And the standards of evaluation, so just hitting some key points on what the narrative study is doing or isn't doing. So is the narrative study focusing on the individual? And then the author may choose to focus on a single or two or three individuals for the research. Are they collecting stories about a significant issue? So this is kind of like the purpose of research, like why is this topic or these people being researched? The author may focus on the stories told by the individual or individuals. Does it develop a chronology? So being able to connect the story in a way that represents it as a story, and having like the order, and the chronology to connect different phases or aspects of the story. And then does it tell a story? Does it report what was said and the themes and how it was said? So kind of like the unfolding of a story, and does it capture that? Or how speakers interact or perform the narrative as well. And embed reflexivity. The author may use reflexive thinking and writing to bring himself or herself into the study, which I also am relating in my mind back to the importance of understanding as a researcher our own stance on a topic and on the research that's being done, and being able to understand where or how we can bring ourselves into that, and like where we might be able to reach that or touch that story. And that is the end of my section. Thank you. And the whole PowerPoint presentation. Thank you for watching.